is men do this with each other in private, in secret. And there's a real trend going on right now with men's inner transformational work to bring cameras into the rooms. And the thing is, when I say dramatic, I don't mean like actors, but you step into a theatrical space, you step into a space that's charged with a narrative that wouldn't be apparent from the room that you're in because it's just a cabin or whatever, but it's charged with imaginal energy that the camera doesn't show. And it makes the sacred work that men do for each other, it makes this work profane. So if you're listening to this and you do men's inner transformational work, turn off the cameras.
Welcome, Will, to Manifesto's YouTube channel. Good to have you on.
It's great to be here, Paul. Thanks so much.
Great. Yeah, we've already been having a chat, but we're going to go for a short, sharp, and kind of direct little talk right now about the subject of bringing religion back, bring back the discourse about religion. It's something that's weighs heavily on both of our hearts. We're both converted to Christianity from all kinds of interesting and colorful backgrounds, a shared background with Burning Man and ayahuasca and New Age stuff and traveling all around the world and stuff like that. I'll just quickly introduce you. So you are a men's purpose coach, a blogger and a podcaster, and you also read poetry and talk about poetry on your podcast, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And what I've listened to has really been fascinating and enjoyable.
Thank you very much.
And the way I wanted to start this talk was to ask you a question, which we've prepared a little bit, which is, if you were going to meet one man from history, who would it be, and what would you talk about if you could sit down and have a conversation with him?
Okay. Yeah, we went back and forth a little bit on this, and we decided to not go for the obvious answer, given that we're both Christians. Yeah. And I thought about a second obvious answer, which would be Peter, but I don't want to talk about Peter because I think there's a more interesting. That'd be cool too, or Paul, but I don't want to talk about either of those. I think what would be more interesting is I would like to go back and talk to William Shakespeare. You mentioned my poetry podcast. I'm glad that you did that. Like, we seem to be in sync in this way, because the episode of my poetry podcast that I'm most proud of is where I read and analyzed the "To Be or Not to Be" soliloquy from Hamlet. And it's just a phenomenally beautiful, genius and brilliant. Doesn't even begin, those words pale in comparison to what's going on in that passage. And that's just a small part of his overall, catalog. And so I would love to go back in time and talk to Shakespeare, the guy who he actually was, because I don't think that the person we're told is Shakespeare was actually him. I don't know who it was, but there's such limited information about him and his life. But something about that existing story doesn't make sense. But I would love to know. I'd love to know his creative process. How do you pierce the veil of consciousness in Middle Ages England? Where did your brilliance come from? Where did your genius come from? How did you see these things? How did you know these things? It's because to really witness the brilliance of Hamlet is to see true transcendent genius that has guided and shaped Western culture and Western literature and really the whole world. I would have so many questions about that for him. And hopefully you guys will listen to the Hamlet podcast and get to see what I mean.
Yeah. So I actually heard someone talking the other day about how actually basically Shakespeare laid the foundational stones for the modern English language in many ways. Is that something you can unpack a little bit more? Because I don't think I really get that completely yet, but
that subject, I would just be, if I said anything about it, I would just be speculating. I do know that one of the things that he did was he helped along with Plato and also Jesus Christ as well, recontextualize the notion of the individual. So one of the things that happened in the Renaissance, which is part of my brand, the Renaissance of Men, is there came a new appreciation for the value of the individual. And that didn't really exist before. Humans lived in this very feudalistic, which is a collectivist kind of way of thinking, where everyone perceives themselves as enmeshed in this social cultural matrix. And it wasn't until the Renaissance that people really started asking questions about the individual and valuing the individual as a human being. And that's why the statue of David is so iconic. And so one of the many reasons. So in Hamlet, one of the things that Shakespeare did was he created a hero for his story that was riddled with the same doubt and fear and angst that all of us fear. He wasn't feel. It wasn't like, I'm going to go charging off and slay the dragon. It was like, what do I do? Like, do I do this? Do I do that? Which is how we all are in life anyway. But no one had ever thought to write that down as a character before. So he took heroism, he took identity and humanity and made it into something that we could look at and see ourselves in the mirror of.
Mhm.
And of course, with his gift of language and metaphor and meter and rhythm and narrative, he turned it into incredible entertainment and poetry.
Mhm.
And so that was part of the genius
Yeah.
of Shakespeare.
So that two things. One thing is, I think from a Peugeot, like we both follow Jonathan Peugeot a little bit, and one could say
Yeah.
from his perspective, maybe that he kind of helped us to illustrate the fractal nature of reality and the way that things scale up and scale down below the human level.
Yeah.
Like a human being is actually more than one thing as well. But the other thing that I was
Yeah.
thinking of was that actually really brings us well into what we wanted to make is the subject of this conversation, which is
Sure.
this return of religion, and how
Mm.
there's a lot of talk about what people use this term re-enchantment, like, kind of enchantment is coming back in somehow. Secular society kind of created this shield against seeing that there's a spiritual reality, and
Mm-hmm.
so for some of us, we've kind of been really exploring, and it's become very, very real. But I think this is seeping more and more into mainstream society today.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to tell a little bit about your story from kind of atheistic or agnostic worldview to where you are today?
Yeah, I'll just in brief. So I don't know that I was ever an atheist or an agnostic. I always have, as far back as I can remember, have had a real strong sense that there's a God, but didn't really understand much about that sense or beyond it. But I knew it was part of reality. So I was born Jewish. I was bar mitzvahed when I was 13. The Torah portion, the Ten Commandments were my Torah portion, so major score. I went to a Catholic high school. I participated in Catholic retreats and boys retreats for the school, which was great. And I loved having theological discussions. I moved to the Bay Area to go to college, and of course was immersed myself in the New Age, kind of spirituality culture there. I've explored Jungianism. I've traveled the world. I've done a lot of men's inner work as well. I've traveled the world. I've been to the Kumbh Hindu festival, 150 million Hindus. I've bathed in the Ganges River 5 times, Vipassana retreat, ayahuasca, as you mentioned, lots of New Age breath work, stuff like that. And I've been to Burning Man 3 times, and the one in the United States. And it was in 2015. I was just coming off of a breakup, and I just spontaneously went to Burning Man, which is kind of what you do in San Francisco. Like, why would I ever go to Burning Man on Tuesday? And then Wednesday, it's like, I'm going to Burning Man. It's how it, being 4 or 5 hours away, it's pretty easy to do. So the breakup happened. I was at Burning Man 5 days later, and I told somebody that, oh, I've just been through this breakup. He's like, hey, you should go to this camp called Spirit Dream. They do a lot of inner healing stuff. Maybe it would help you work through things. I'm like, great, okay. So I went the next day, and I sat down with 2 women and a man. A woman in her mid 40s, woman in her late 50s, and a man probably in his late 60s, early 70s. And I did this 3.5 hour long healing encounter with them, just going through all the stuff from my childhood, inner trauma work, self-limiting beliefs, projections, all this stuff that I was so familiar with, lots of transformational psychotherapeutic practices, group work in San Francisco. But I'm looking around as I'm going through all this stuff, and I'm like, it's this Burning Man. It's like, there's no Vishnu statue, there's no Shiva, there's no psychedelic Alex Gray art, like there's no Buddhas anywhere. I'm like, what are these people about? What are these people about? So then at the very end, and I'll compress the story, at the very end of the 3.5 hour healing encounter, I got my answer. They were closing up the ceremony, and one of the women was standing over me, standing behind me, speaking. I couldn't hear what she was saying, and I had a vision in my mind, and it was of a man wearing goggles of all things, walking up, and is like, I see his face, and the face was like, no, look. I'm like, I see you, the face and the goggles and the shape of the head. And then later they took me to somewhere else in the tent that I wasn't able to see from when I came in, and there was the same face that I had seen in my vision, painted on, minus the goggles, painted on the wall, and it was the face of Jesus Christ. And so he had appeared to me, and I asked, like, who are you guys? Like, well, we're Christians. Found out that they were a Christian ministry group that had been going to Burning Man for 12 years. ministering to some of the saddest and most lost people potentially in the world. And no, they didn't have a big cross hanging up outside or anything like that. There was nothing inside that would indicate that they were Christians at all, except for that painting, which, where it was positioned, wasn't visible. But they ministered to people and never made a thing about their faith. And that was my introduction to Christianity that I didn't know had ever existed before. But it showed me this is what I think real Christianity is about. And then it took root in me after that and has grown since then.
Wow, powerful story. And especially that must have been quite something, seeing that exact picture that you had already experienced with was it like the Burning Man dust goggles that people walk around with, so it was a burner Jesus that you actually
burner
met.
Jesus. Yeah, well, that's the joke. That's the joke that everyone would make. Everyone's like, I met Jesus at Burning Man, ha. That's what everyone would say. It was like, no, I actually kind of did.
Yeah.
So, but it was a very powerful moment for me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, fascinating. So I as we spoke about before, Burning Man has been a very big part of my spiritual journey as well. I've been hardcore atheist, new atheist, kind of rejecting any kind of spirituality. Actually, arguing with people that I could find about why religion was the most terrible thing ever to happen to mankind. But then slowly through Burning Man, started getting opening up to the idea of something else. Somehow, and then more and more seeing the need for that. And I guess for me, it was Jordan Peterson who brought in a new perspective, a way of seeing Christianity, which could somehow connect to my worldview, and that I could expand on that as well. But I guess one of the challenges that I see, and as this is coming into discourse again, and into normal discourse where normal people are starting to realize that maybe there is a value here in Christianity, then I think what a lot of people run into is this idea of God and faith as well. So yeah, I don't know, what are your thoughts about faith? Like, what is faith, and how has that been for you to go from, okay, like, nice, have a vision, kind of weird coincidence or a synchronistic thing or something strange, but then I guess that that plants a mustard seed of faith somehow or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for me, now the thing of talking about religion is that every man or woman for that matter will talk about it differently, because I would say that that God manifests our personalities, and there's that word, right? But our personalities become channels through which the message can be preached. So the way that I might go about talking about things would be very different from the way that you might, or Jonathan Peugeot might, or Jordan Peterson, or my pastor. It's all these different ways of looking at it that take advantage of the best parts of our personalities and bring that message forward. So the way that I'll talk about these things, is not meant to be the universal way that these things should be talked about. It's just me. So for me, the key to faith is and has been the notion of redemption. This idea that we can go through something really, really terrible, and if we engage with the process actively, there will come a moment where it's complete, and we will be better for it in a way we wouldn't have otherwise been able to achieve. So you see this a lot with people who are in remission from cancer. They say, I would never wish it on anybody, but it's one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And that's redemption. That's redemption. And now there's no reason in a materialistic universe that that redemption should exist. There's no reason that tragedy should yield like beauty, a higher level of beauty. It's not just, for those who are just listening, I suppose, I'm going along, my hands going direction, hopefully you can imagine. I'm going along my life, I go through on this dip, and then I come back out, and you might expect to end up at the same point where you were before. That's not how it works. It's like you go through this dip, you go through this tragedy, and you end up in a better place for it. That's redemption. And if you've done men's inner work, men's inner transformation work, which I know you have at the European Men's Gathering, what's the message? You find the gold in the shadow. You see men go into shadow work, into what I imagine are horrible, catastrophic, deep tragedies in their lives. I've seen many of these things myself. And the men who go into that space and have the courage to go into that space bring something out that makes them better. Why does the universe work that way? There's no reason why it should. And for me, that's proof that there is a God, that God wants us to engage with suffering actively. And by actively engaging with suffering, we can be transformed for the better. That to me is how I address faith.
Yeah, could you say that like it's evidence that the basic pattern of reality is redemption through death? Like death is actually, in a kind of secular mindset, death is the
Yes.
worst possible thing, and nothing could be worse than death. But actually, death is rebirth, and
Yes.
you need the Christian story, and you need to enter into the Christian story. You can't even really understand it from the outside. You can kind of get there some kind of intellectual framework there that makes sense, but in my understanding, like it's only when you actually enter into this that you see it from the inside, that then it's just like, oh, everything makes perfect sense. And you see it reflected in natural cycles of death and rebirth, and in the seasons of the year, but also in just every experience in life as well, right?
Yes, very much. And I think what really challenges this about the materialistic mind, about the secular mind, again, about the modernist mind, is the mind can't do it. The mind cannot kill itself. That's not what the mind is capable of. Your mind can't use its own power to undo itself. You have to surrender. There will be a moment, and I'm sure you've seen this in men's transformational work, as have I. There is a moment where the man goes to the very bottom of the pit and his mind won't get him there, and he has to let go and release into just pure emotion and pure surrender and pure transformation. And he has to let his own mind go. And there's nothing more challenging to the mind than the potential of its own death, and surrender to something higher than itself that it can't control or understand. And so naturally, the Western mind would resist notions of faith that require that level of surrender.
So let's quickly relate this back to the work you're doing, because you're running this podcast called The Renaissance of Men, and you're calling men to be masculine.
Yes.
And
to
you're
be
seeing like
reborn.
this degradation of this idea, but now you're talking about surrender and letting go into pure emotion. So can you tie that up for us as well?
Well, because you're not supposed to stay there. You don't surrender into pure emotion. Now, the one thing I want to be real clear about is men do this with each other in private, in secret. And there's a real trend going on right now with men's inner transformational work to bring cameras into the rooms. And the thing is, these are when I say dramatic, I don't mean like actors, but you step into a theatrical space. You step into a space that's charged with a narrative that wouldn't be apparent from the room that you're in because it's just a cabin or whatever, but it's charged with imaginal energy that the camera doesn't show. And it makes the sacred work that men do for each other, it makes this work profane. So if you're listening to this and you do men's inner transformational work, turn off the cameras, smash the cameras, let men do this work. Really, let men do this work in private, because men have to be able to go into these spaces of surrender and emotion with each other, within a supportive, container of strength, to die and be reborn with each other, and then put ourselves back together to go back out into the world, not to stay in that open emotional state, not to stay in that surrendered state, but to witness our own strength of surrender, to reaffirm our faith in ourselves and God and our brothers, and then we zip it back up, transformed and changed, and go into the world. And so it's a balance, right? And so this is the call of what it means to be a man, is to live in balance between needing to be decisive action out there in the world. And that's what the Renaissance of Men is about. Decisive action in your life, about helping men find purpose so they know what to act for and why. So that's one side of the picture. The other side of the picture is our relationship with our emotions, which we have to be able to experience in the proper way and in the proper amounts with the proper people. And there's a depth to which that we must be able to experience emotion with our wives and our kids. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with shedding a few tears at a beautiful and moving moment. But that doesn't mean that we need to stay in an open emotional state, a vulnerable emotional state, and meet our lives with emotion that will not serve us, that will not create safety for women or protection for children, or for us, or for our brothers, for that matter. So the depth of emotion needs to be experienced in private with men, so that we can go there. And know that we'll be okay. It's in a sacred space, the space is closed, and then we go back out there into the world and we act. And so that's the balance between the two.
Well, I think that was incredibly well said, and you put that, the way that you framed that was extremely valuable, because there's such a call right now for men to be more emotional and in touch with their feelings and this kind of things. And I get it. I get why they're saying that. But the reaction of a lot of men then is to go out in public and to start like, emptying their
Yeah.
chest all the time, constantly, right? And then you just have this kind of like breakdown. And so I think what you said there, and the call to, so we actually allowed a documentary maker to come to the European Men's Gathering and make a documentary there, and never again. Not because,
Yeah.
I really appreciate his intention and everything he's trying to do, and I think it's probably going to create a great thing, and it's going to bring a lot more attention for a lot of people about this kind of work, but I can just see like the impact it has on what's actually happening in the room. There's this aspect that I'm still working to communicate as well, because what we're looking to do with men is to strengthen them in their masculinity. That's what men's work is about. But a large part of doing that is in secret, as you say, like in behind the scenes. Then we're actually opening up that feminine space. But you can't make the feminine space.
I'll challenge you on that. I'll challenge you on that, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Well, what I'm saying is you can't make the feminine space, you can't make it the masculine kind of structure or something like that. So when I say feminine, I mean like the holding, the encompassing, to be able to be together or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Let's hear a challenge, and then I'll take it from there.
Yeah. So this is an idea that someone gave me that I've been kicking around, and I'm getting much more comfortable with it, because I have also been accustomed to using this phrase, my feminine side. You know what I mean? Men don't have a feminine side. We don't have a feminine side. We are men. We have emotions. We experience our emotions as men. We experience our feelings and intuitions as men. We experience community as men. That is not owned by women. It's part of being a man. It's part of being a human, right? And women experience it in their way, and men experience it in our way. So I don't think that we go into the forest or wherever and we open up a feminine space. I think we open up a masculine men's feeling space, because there is a way that men experience emotions. Emotions are not owned by women. Men have emotions too. We have glorious emotions. Read Homer's The Iliad. You will see men experience glory. All of Western literature, you will see men experience emotion. And I think giving emotion over to say it's our feminine side, or community is about women, I think it dishonors men and what we have going on, what we actually are. We do have emotions. We do experience them as men. We will never experience a feminine side. We have emotions as men. We experience community as men. So conceptualizing it as a feminine space, I think immediately sets things potentially going in the wrong direction.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's a longer discussion. We can take it another time.
For sure. And that's not to dishonor women. That's not to dishonor women. That's not to dishonor men either. It's to honor both of us in our uniqueness and how powerful we are as beings.
Yeah, I see it the way is that like everybody has a masculine and a feminine aspect. So like hierarchy is intimately related to masculine and feminine. It's a bit confusing because there's a kind of like equal meeting of masculine and feminine, but normally also the masculine is that which kind of imparts and holds or like kind of leads, and the feminine is that which is submitting and receiving or something like that as well. But there's lots of different ways of using these words.
Sure. Yeah. But even when you go to these weekends, there is a leader, and there are facilitators, there are people in charge, and there are people participating. And so we don't ever truly depart from hierarchy. It's the recognition within ourselves that hierarchy, which men so naturally fall into, is not all there is to us, that there is a side of community as well. And that is masculine. There's a masculine community where we can take off the crown and take off the armor, the warrior armor, and we can be guys together, and then we go back and we put it all back on and we go back into the world. And so I think that can be masculine as well.
Absolutely. So yeah, and that's what I really believe. And let's aim to finish in talking about family, because I think at the end of the day, that's what we're aiming for is for men who can become the leaders of their own lives and become stable enough so that they are able to then be the leader of a family as well. And I think to doing this, we're talking about the return of religion. And I think what a lot of guys are realizing is that in many, I'm living in Scandinavia, where the state has basically replaced men. Like, you don't even need a man to get pregnant here anymore. As a woman, the state will pay for free impregnation of an anonymous sperm donor, so you will never know who the father is. In fact, You can just find another woman and say you're two mothers, and there is no such thing as a father. So even the birth certificate will now say there's no such thing as a father, just two parents.
Sorry.
And it'll be registered
It's
that
terrible.
way. And you know, we've invented technologies that have replaced all the traditional jobs that men were needed for, right? You know, people driving trucks and taxis and stuff are obviously the next ones heading out as well, right? And so as a result, I think guys are realizing, well, we need to get down to basics again. And I think that's where we've seen, and you know, this can be triggering for a lot of people as well, in that like, oh, like priests are always men, or you know, there's a historicity of priests are men. We talk about God the Father and Christ was a man, and so this is patriarchy or something like that. But you know, no matter which way you look at it, there's something about male leadership when it comes to spirituality. And personally, I would just say, on a very pragmatic level, you know, men are just have this drive towards truth, about being uncompromising. Even today, if you look at philosophers, then you know, there's something like 99% of philosophers are males. There are very, very good female philosophers as well. It's just a small percentage of them. And so I think a man being able to lead other people in their exploration of spirituality, and to be able to do that, he can't just be, you know, grabbing hold of whatever great, you know, smart ideas he's meeting right now, but he needs to base himself on a tradition that's far older and far greater and far more based on a much greater experience than himself, right?
Agreed.
And I think that's what guys are looking for, to actually make themselves relevant and needed again. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's enough content for like a 2 or 3 hour podcast and what you just said for the way that I can respond, but I'll try to keep it brief. I think what's really what I'm really present to right now is if I were living in Scandinavia and women can get an anonymous sperm donor and you know, just raise your baby that way. Like, as a man, that I'm furious. That makes me furious. Now, remember, I'm an American, and so my relationship to the state is perhaps different from Scandinavia. But I will just be my American self and say that's infuriating, because that's a direct strike against the necessity of men. It's a direct strike to remove them, to remove paternity, to remove all of that, and invert the social order as making the state, which is naturally collectivist, violent against the value of the individual, which is expressed in the family, and that makes me very mad. And I hope all the men listening to this will look at this as and I hope perhaps many of you do, that the state is actively trying to replace men. It is trying to replace men. That's the point. It's not only trying to replace men; it's trying to replace God, and God is a father. God reveals himself in the masculine. And because our moral universe is ordered by laws, and always will be, There's a reason why, if you're listening, that you don't lie. There's a reason why you don't just like trip people walking down the street, or you know, you don't just key cars when you're walking, like anonymously when you're walking past them, because you know there is a moral order to the universe. You know there is, and that's a law that's written by God, bounding our behaviors morally within our hearts. That masculine God, is attempting to be replaced by the state. That is Marxism. That is Marxism. That is Engels, and that's everything that's come after. That's Gramsci. That's Marcuse. You can listen to the New Discourses podcast on YouTube with James Lindsay and hear about all of this. There's an active attempt to not only subvert God, but to subvert men and families and replace it with the state. And you guys should be getting real angry about what's going on, because it's showing up in your homes. And the first thing that a man needs to push back on is a family. The blessings of a man and woman coming together in mutual support and mutual exchange and mutual acknowledgement and honoring of what the masculine and feminine are for the creation of life is empowering like nothing else. I'm not blessed to be a husband or a father yet, but I know this conceptually, and I'm surrounded by brothers that are all noble, worthy fathers. And that's what they tell me consistently. I couldn't do what I do without my wife. And so that's the blessing that the true feminine can bring to the masculine, and the blessing of the generations between men and women coming together and raising children, healthy children, healthier than what we got. That pushes back on all of this. And the only thing, just to wrap up the thought, that can truly you can truly plant your feet on and push back is in faith, is in something higher than yourself, is in service to something higher than yourself, that guides you and directs you and gives you principles on which to stand, that are eternal and do not change with changing governments or changing world orders. They are eternal and were written into the fabric of the universe. And when you can plant your feet on that, you can push back on anything with courage and bravery and strength, and know that God's got your back.
Powerful ideas and some challenging thoughts, I think, for people who are standing outside of the Christian faith, for sure, or standing outside of a belief in God. I think that when you're talking about God revealing himself in the masculine, then the picture I had is like, if you kind of like, who is it that's protecting a family from the outside? If you're outside of Christianity, then when you see in towards that family, then you're first going to come into the Father, and so that's what you're gonna see with God. I believe like God should certainly not be limited to like male or female. That would be a deep misunderstanding of what God is. The prophetic tradition is that God, you can just say what God is not, right? But certainly, I think what you're saying really makes sense, that like he reveals himself as a masculine of laws. So if God is basically the laws of reality, then as you hit into these, then it hurts, right? And
yes,
God is what's saying to you like, hey, you're bumping into that. And I think more and more people are experiencing that in their lives today, is that they're bumping into something that hurts. And it might be from this thing of noticing like, wow, men are being replaced. And we don't have anything to fight against it with. It's just coming in. And we think that, from a secular perspective, it's craziness what's happening in this country now. There's no explanation. It's like people are just losing their minds. And then you have Corona, and then you have like, all this stuff. And so I think people are like grasping for something to grab onto. Both you and me, we for many years, the one thing that we didn't want to grasp onto, that was this faith that came down from our forefathers, and something that has been the foundation of our society, and for some reason we've rejected and written off for personal reasons, which for my sake I think were actually good reasons. I rejected what I grew up with because there was holes in it. It didn't make sense. It was inconsistent, and so there was a need for me to go deeper into it. And so there was a further step of nuance, and so allowing myself to go back. There's this poem that keeps on coming back to me by, you probably know it, I think it's Eliot, about we will, at the end of all of our searching, then we will come back and we'll know the place for the first time.
It's The Alchemist.
Yeah. That's just that really just kind of hits me every time I see that. I realize like that's really what I've been doing. So
can I come
I'm going to give you the final words to finish off, and then I think we're going to have a follow-up on this one to have another conversation in the future.
For sure. Okay, so 3 things. First is we went into exile as men. I gave a talk at 21 Convention where I talked about this. We went into exile as men, and we did what men have always done in exile: is we lit a fire, and we've connected with the spirit of our ancestors and the spirit of our brothers and the spirit of God. But we needed to go into exile. This is the redemption story that I'm talking about. That would ostensibly be a terrible thing became a gateway to a deeper faith for both of us, and I know this is true for many men. I would also say around the faith journey, I released a podcast today with a man named Laser Hodl. He's a Bitcoin citizen and sovereign hopeful is how he describes himself. And it's a 5-hour-long podcast, so quite a bit longer than this. And I recommend every man listen to it, because we go through the socio-political situation, the global situation, and we ended Christianity and faith and family. So if you want to stick around for the entirety of the journey, I'm very grateful for that conversation. A big blessing to both of us. And that just came out today. And the third and final thing I'll say is about men and faith and who are outside of God. There's a peculiar side effect with talking about God and Christianity and religion, where we tend to do it in this one-to-many kind of way. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But the problem is with Christianity in particular, because it's so confronting for so many men, and some of these ideas are so confronting because of their relationship potentially with their fathers or priests or pastors, and their relationship with the society around them, they find it really difficult to engage with these ideas in a one-to-many, like, you're not talking to me, like, or you're talking down to me or something like that, because that's been done to them at some point in the past. Someone has talked down to them about a religion. And so I find that a lot of these conversations about religion really need to happen man-to-man in private. In a situation where it's like, look, I'm not talking down to you. We're having a conversation eye to eye as equals on the level where I can ask, okay, what are your beliefs? How's that working out for you? And you can be unashamed and unafraid to really share. It's long conversations to say, look, the way that you perceive reality, ultimate reality as working, helps define your choices in your life. Are these choices working out for you and all of us collectively in the way you want? If no, are you open to questioning your beliefs, right? One, and two, are you opening to hearing another picture of theology of how the ultimate reality might work? That is full of blessings and requires a lot of courage and surrender. But on the other side of that leap is everything you could have ever possibly wanted. And I can speak for myself and say, what I have found is peace, is real peace I've never known before. And from that peace, I've found a lot of strength and a lot of power to push back in the ways that I can.
Beautiful. Well, thank you really very much for sharing those perspectives and a piece of yourself. And that was really especially valuable for me. That the part about like the sacredness and the secretness of men's work really hit well. And I think you bring this together in a very, very aligned way that fits together. So thanks for that. And I'm going to take a look at a bit more poetry. So I think I'm going to look at that Shakespeare segment that you spoke about as well. And yeah, I'm definitely up for taking the next conversation in the future again.
Oh, I think it'll be great.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.